The Honorable Mr. Justice Winston Anderson, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Honorable Madam Justice Marva MacDonald, Bishop President, Court of Appeal of Jamaica, Judges of the Court of Appeal of Jamaica, Justices of the Supreme Court of Jamaica, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Christopher Malcolm, Principal of the Norman Manley Law School, members of academia, representatives of the Jamaican Bar Association, esteemed panelists, Professor Charles Grant, Dr. Peter Glegg, Dr. Lisa Vassiani, Reverend Norbert Stevens, Mr. Rahim Augustine Joseph, distinguished members of the clergy, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural lecture hosted by the Caribbean Court of Justice in collaboration with the Norman Manley Law School. Tonight's discussion asks a profound question. No first use of nuclear weapons, the limits of law. Now, at first glance, it seems like a topic far removed from our Caribbean reality, yet tonight invites us to consider something much bigger. How much protection, for example, can international law really provide when the world's most powerful nations are involved? Another question I asked myself, what responsibilities do today's leaders owe future generations? And another one, what role can small states like ours play in conversations that shape global peace and security? All important questions, and I just want you to think about it as we invite our first speaker, or to get the conversation started. Help me welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the principal of the Norman Manley Law School, Dr. Christopher Malcolm.
Good evening, and thank you, Madam Moderator, for having made my job so much easier. I want to, of course, welcome everyone specifically to the Aubrey Fraser Lecture Theatre. And it's instructive that we are in this room and, of course, at the Norman Manley Law School. And my job is really to welcome everyone, both here in person as well as those online, on behalf of the Council of Legal Education, on behalf as well of the Norman Manley Law School, our faculty, staff, students, alumni, and as we like to say these days, the entire NMLS ecosystem. We're building one, we're carving it, and we're happy to have everybody here in it celebrating with us. Today is one of those days where Your Excellencies, Madam Justice Marva MacDonald, Bishop, I'm seeing you sitting here, President of our Court of Appeal, and a very proud graduate of this institution. Other persons, Justice Patrick Brooks, retired, again a proud graduate of this institution. The entire set of persons, Madam Justice Hilary Phillips, who has taught here for many years and is as long associated with this institution as it has existed, pretty much. And so many others, both here with us in person and online. We really are happy to have you here. But more importantly, we're also happy to have, on this occasion, Justice Winston Anderson, the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, here to share with us on a matter of significance beyond our imagination even at this time. And to lead, in fact, a discussion. We will have a panel of persons who will lead a discussion involving questions from the floor, questions from online, and a discussion which we hope to have continued beyond here, from the grassroots up as much as it is coming down. And hence this invitation being as broad as it was. It's not simply about us being in a cloistered space speaking to ourselves. It is about us moving beyond the cathedral to the streets, to ensure that the issue of this magnitude is well understood and that discussions going forward are participated in as best as we can. I am here simply to have a wonderful time, to enjoy the participation, and to share as I'm able to. As I listen to Justice Winston Anderson, I hear the panelists and see the debate being moderated by Madam Moderator, Janella pursues very experienced broadcaster and somebody who is going to expertly guide us through these proceedings. Again, thank you all, and by all means, see it for what it is, an opportunity to participate, an opportunity to take the dialogue forward, and a space in which we can be safe to speak, to express our views, and as always, and in a situation where we all know that we do so respectfully, and we do so in a manner which is intended to get solutions rather than simply be another talk shop. Thank you again for your time here, for your presence, and we're happy to have you and always willing to welcome you. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malcolm. Now, I got excited when I saw that this next person will be giving remarks because if you didn't know, I'm from St. Lucia. And so I invite you to turn your attention to the screen where we will hear now from the chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Mr. Philip J. Pierre.
Good evening. I thank the organizers of the New Freedom Lecture for inviting me to deliver some brief remarks at this inaugural lecture. I'm in full support of an initiative that speaks to one of the most important aspirations of humanity, a world that is less threatened by the possibility of nuclear conflict. The Caribbean is a diverse and vibrant region of small island and low-lying coastal states, home to approximately 44 million people. Our nations are bound by a shared history of indigenous heritage, colonialism, the fight for emancipation, and the pursuit of self-determination. From this rich legacy has emerged a region that values human dignity, respects cultural diversity, and remains closely committed to peace, cooperation, democracy, and the rule of law. These values continue to shape our engagement with the international community and our unwavering support for initiatives that promote global peace and security. The Caribbean is also a region that is especially vulnerable to hurricanes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters, the adverse effects of climate change, and economic shocks. These realities serve as a constant reminder that no nation, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, is insulated or immune from global threats. It is precisely because of our shared experience of vulnerability that the Caribbean has consistently championed multilateralism, peaceful coexistence, and respect for international law. In summary, the Caribbean is usually the victims of circumstances we have not created. The Caribbean's commitment to cooperation is perhaps best reflected in its regional integration journey, recognizing that our individual economies and populations were too small to thrive in isolation. Caribbean leaders choose partnership. Multiple Caribbean nations chose to band together to represent one region on a global scale. This vision was realized in the creation of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, by the Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973, establishing a broader framework for economic integration, functional cooperation, and the coordination of foreign policy. The revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which established the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, the CSME, further advanced that vision by facilitating the free movement of goods, services, capital, and skilled persons, while encouraging the coordinated development of the community. At every stage, the Caribbean has demonstrated a belief that our greatest challenges are best addressed through collaboration, dialogue, and shared purpose. It is this same philosophy that informs our support for international initiatives aimed at strengthening peace and collective security, which are threatened by the humanitarian, environmental, and economic consequences arising from the use of nuclear weapons or nuclear testing. These consequences that cannot be confined to any one nation or region, but will be borne by humanity as a whole. I'm especially proud as a Caribbean nation that this important initiative is being championed through Caribbean thought leadership. It demonstrates that our region continues to make meaningful and impactful contributions to issues of global importance and which should be a priority for the international agenda. I'm hopeful that the nations and peoples of the world will come together in support of efforts and initiatives for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and cessation of nuclear testing. I also fully support the proposal that the United Nations declare an annual International Day of No First Use of Nuclear Weapons. Such a day would serve as a powerful reminder of our shared responsibility to prevent nuclear conflict, promote dialogue, and reaffirm our commitment to safeguarding present and future generations. Let us seize this opportunity to advance a future founded not on fear, but on cooperation, peace, and our common humanity. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the chairman of CARICOM and the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Mr. Philip J. Pierre. Our next presenter is also on video. I now present to you a message from the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith. Please turn your attention to the video.
Mr. President, since its inauguration in September 2014, the commemoration of the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons has kept the issue of global disarmament efforts at the forefront of world attention. Each commemorative event, therefore, represents a further opportunity to focus on advancing the goal of achieving a nuclear weapons-free world. Jamaica, as a non-nuclear weapons state, has been playing its role in advancing nuclear disarmament. Jamaica has strengthened its legislative and administrative framework to combat nuclear weapons proliferation by enacting the Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection Act and establishing its implementing agency, the Hazardous Substances Regulatory Authority, to regulate the use of ionizing radiation and nuclear technology for the protection of people, property, and the environment. Mr. President, to further global efforts towards the elimination of nuclear weapons, Jamaica will shortly ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It is undoubtedly positive that nuclear weapons have not been used since 1945. However, the threat continues to loom as tense relations exist among nuclear weapon states. As a community of nations, we can do more. Non-proliferation is insufficient. We know from history that the use of nuclear weapons has devastating humanitarian effects, inflicting mass death and destruction. We also know that the strengthening of national nuclear weapons systems diverts resources from the world's biggest threats, such as climate change, inequality, and pandemics. Mr. President, to achieve general and complete disarmament under effective international control, we must all recommit to cooperative dialogue in good faith, utilizing the multilateral system that was created for that very purpose. We call on states that have not joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to consider doing so as a matter of urgency. Jamaica stands with all states parties to treaties such as these, which support the global goal of a world that's peaceful and secure for present and future generations. We will do our part. Jamaica remains committed to the disarmament agenda. We join the international community in working to eliminate nuclear weapons. Their presence has no role in the future we need. I thank you.
I now invite Ms. Eulalie Greenaway, Senior Tutor here at the Norman Manley Law School, to introduce our keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome her.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The Honorable Mr. Justice Winston Anderson, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Honorable Madam Justice Marva McDonald Bishop, President of the Court of Appeal of Jamaica, Judges of the Court of Appeal of Jamaica, Justices of the Supreme Court of Jamaica, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Christopher Malcolm, Principal of the Norman Manley Law School, members of academia, representatives of the Jamaican Bar Association, esteemed panelists, Professor Charles Grant, Dr. Peter Glegg, Dr. Lisa Vassiani, Reverend Norbert Stevens, Mr. Rhyme Augustine Joseph, distinguished members of the clergy, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen in the lecture theatre and online, good night. The Honorable Mr. Justice Winston Anderson was born in Jamaica, and on his appointment to the Caribbean Court of Justice on June 15, 2010, he holds the distinction of being the first Jamaican judge appointed to the Caribbean Court of Justice. In fact, his elevation to President of the Caribbean Court of Justice in 2025 also affirmed his standing as the first Jamaican to hold the position of president. Of course, I note from information available to the public that has come to my attention that Barbados may lay some claim to the Honorable President, he having chosen a particular course in terms of his citizenship at some point. So we acknowledge that there may be claims elsewhere. Justice Anderson's foundation years were spent in Jamaica, where his initial exposure to formal education commenced at the Brittonville Primary School. He then moved on to the Ferncourt High School and later to St. Andrew Technical High School in Kingston. His matriculation to the UWI Cave Hill campus Faculty of Law marked the beginning of an illustrious journey in higher education and the law. He read law at the UWI Cave Hill campus, graduating with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 1983. He then pursued the Master of Laws degree at that same faculty. He proceeded to Cambridge University on Commonwealth and Chevening scholarships, where he earned a doctorate in philosophy, majoring in international and environmental law. He then joined the full-time faculty at the Faculty of Law, Cave Hill, and over time, he was promoted to senior lecturer, a deputy dean and head of the teaching department of law, and in 2006, made a professor of law. He has authored several academic texts and numerous peer-reviewed articles. But President Anderson's achievements took him beyond the world of academia. He served as General Counsel of the Caribbean Community from 2003 until 2006, and as Executive Director of the Caribbean Law Institute Center. President Anderson's contribution to the work and achievements of the CCJ are well chronicled and commenced essentially on his appointment to the court. He was the founding chairman of the educational arm of the court, which we now know as the CCJ Academy for Law, and has been the editor of the Academy's publications. He has also chaired the CCJ Privileges and Immunities Committee, Policies and Approvals Committee, and is a member of the court's Monitoring and Evaluation Committee. Across the Council of Legal Education, we are very familiar with President Anderson's deep involvement in the organization of the annual CCJ International Law Mooting Competition, and as a judge for the competition. We further acknowledge President Anderson's involvement and service in global and regional affairs. As a founding member of the International Advisory Council of the United Nations Environment Program, member of the Advisory Commission on Environmental Law to the Organization of American States, member of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, group of experts, chairman of the Disciplinary Committee and Ethics Committee of Cricket West Indies 2017, member of the International Cricket Council Code of Conduct Commission in 2018, member of the ICC Dispute Resolution Commission, and a judge of the Global Court of Arbitration for Sport. Called to the Bar of England and Wales, Lincoln's Inn, he's also called to the Jamaican and the Barbados bars. We are honored to have you, President Anderson, as the keynote speaker at this inaugural New Freedom Public Lecture, which is being held in collaboration with the Norman Manley Law School, and we're happy that you chose us. We look forward to what you will share, and we welcome you once again.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my great pleasure to be here this evening at the first New Freedom Lecture. I wish to thank Dr. Christopher Malcolm, Principal of the Norman Manley Law School, and his team at the Law School for kindly collaborating with the Caribbean Court of Justice and graciously hosting this inaugural event, which I hope you'll find engaging. As you are all aware, we have just celebrated Emancipation Day on August 1st. And in 2 days' time, on 6 August, Jamaica as a nation celebrates its 64th anniversary of independence from the United Kingdom. These two milestones embody remembrances of colonial oppression and subjugation, but also of liberation. These occasions are meant to honor those before us who struggled and sacrificed for our right to self-determination, our right to autonomy, our right to dignity, and importantly for tonight, our right to freedom. The problem in outline. Some of you may recall the 2023 Academy-winning film Oppenheimer, which chronicles the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant American physicist and the father of the atom bomb. The film focuses on his leadership of the Manhattan Project at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, where the first atom bomb was designed, assembled, and tested. Under Christopher Nolan's masterful direction, the film is more than just a historical account of the bomb's development. It explores the ambition and power which drove that project and the horrific consequences of the project's success. Oppenheimer's deep fear, dread, and guilt became clear towards the end of the film in the aftermath of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even more profound, there is a haunting question that runs throughout the film. Relatively early in the movie, Dr. Oppenheimer visits Albert Einstein to discuss the near-zero possibility, 3 in 1 million, that the heat from the fission explosion could ignite nitrogen in the atmosphere and set fire to the entire world, which could not be extinguished. The movie's final lines return to this motif in the following exchange between the two. Oppenheimer: Albert, when I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world. Einstein: I remember it well. What of it? Oppenheimer: I believe we did. I invoke this film at the start of our conversation this evening because it forcefully reintroduced to our time and our generation the terrifying prospect that the use of nuclear weapons could easily be an extinction-level event for all life on Earth. So the question arises, how free are we? Are we free if we live at the whim and mercy of a handful of people who have the power to destroy humanity multiple times over with the push of the nuclear button? And what, if anything, can we do about it? How can we engineer a new freedom from this terrible bondage? Before going further, I want to clarify my use of the pronoun we. When I offer that we are at the mercy of those with nuclear weapons, I am not speaking only of the hundreds of people in this room and those online. I am speaking of the approximately 8.3 billion people currently living on the face of the earth. And I am also speaking of the approximately 109 billion people who lived here before us. Because if we go, no one will be left to tend their graves, or their memories, or their contributions to civilization. Anniversaries. August 6, 2 days from today, the 64th birthday of Jamaica's independence, marks the 81st anniversary of the bombing of the city of Hiroshima, Japan. This was the first time in history that a nuclear weapon was used against people. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the United States dropped a uranium bomb named Little Boy on the city in retaliation for Japan's 1941 attack on the U.S. naval base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The destruction stretched for more than 13 square kilometers. For comparison, the Kingston Parish is about 22.7 square kilometers, so more than half of the parish of Kingston. An estimated 78,000 people were incinerated instantly. Hundreds of thousands were injured, and an entire city was decimated. 3 days later, on 9 August 1945, the United States dropped another atomic bomb, Fat Man, on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. By the end of that year, it was estimated that 90,000 additional people in both cities had been killed as a result of the bombings. Hundreds of thousands of people were left maimed or left with long-term effects, including illnesses such as leukemia, cancer, and other side effects from radiation exposure. For survivors, the challenges to their physical health and mental health continued for decades after 1945. Continuing threat of nuclear weapons. 81 years since the double attack on Japan, the threat of nuclear weapons continues to hang heavily over us. Since World War II, more states have followed in the footsteps of the United States and acquired nuclear weapons. 8 states are declared nuclear weapon states: United States, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, France, India, China, Pakistan, and North Korea. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied possession of nuclear weapons, but is widely regarded as being a nuclear state. All told, These 9 nuclear powers possess an estimated 12,000 nuclear warheads. Advances in science and technology have made modern nuclear weapons far more lethal and destructive than those used in 1945. Current nuclear weapons utilize thermonuclear fusion instead of simple fission, with average yields 20 to 80 times larger than in 1945. Modern nuclear weapons also utilize computerized precision guidance systems rather than gravity drops. The Hiroshima, little boy, and the Nagasaki, fat man bombs had explosive yields of roughly 15 kilotons and 21 kilotons of TNT, respectively. By way of contrast, modern nuclear warheads range from 100 to over 1,000 kilotons. The modern weapons are stronger in power, range, and stealth. An all-out nuclear war could easily obliterate civilization several times over. Governments, courthouses, hospitals, schools, universities, transportation networks, communication systems, and economic institutions could collapse simultaneously across borders, across continents, across islands. An all-out nuclear war would fundamentally destabilize the Earth's atmosphere, triggering global cooling, mass ozone depletion, and toxic rainfall. Massive, uncontrollable firestorms would follow, presuming that there was anyone available to bear witness. Deeper dive into the consequences. Let us sit with this for a moment. Beyond the loss of our environment, beyond the loss of all 8.3 billion human beings who now live on the planet and the 109 billion who have ever lived here, we risk the loss of human civilization produced by human consciousness. The destruction of civilization would mean the loss of humanity's accumulated cultural heritage and inheritance. Our literature, languages, artistic achievements, scientific discoveries, legal traditions, philosophical thought, and historical memory representing the collective work of countless generations. The achievements of the great names of history, Parmenides, Plato, Leonardo da Vinci, Newton, Bob Marley, and the Jambar Annual Awards banquets. The 7 wonders of the ancient world and the enduring physical symbols of religious faith. The Buddha under the Bodhi tree, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, and 3 crucifixion crosses at Golgotha. All these and more could be washed away in the nuclear dust. Nuclear war threatens all our achievements since we stepped foot from the Garden of Eden or from the caves to do agriculture. A final dimension, the speed of light. There's a final dimension to the consequence of nuclear war which must be confronted. For this we need a digression into light, into the speed of light, to be precise. We flip the switch and the room is plunged into darkness. We flip the switch and light floods the room. The light is there all at once, apparently instantaneously. Well, apparently, but not actually. Albert Einstein proved that there are no instantaneous communications in nature. And more importantly, why there cannot be instantaneous communications in nature. Permit me a personal digression from the original digression of the speed of light. Having read Einstein's theory of special relativity, published in 1905, I was shaken when I subsequently read the case of Brinkebon against Stahag during my 1980s undergraduate law studies at Cave Hill campus, University of the West Indies. In Brinkebon, Lord Wilberforce reflected on the various circumstances in which telex communications may combine to form a contract. At page 41 of the appeal cases reports, he described telex as a means of instantaneous communication. The law lord went on to create, quote, a general rule covering instantaneous communication, page 41. And in this, his fellow law lords agreed. Lord Fulton of Bollybenton, page 43, and Lord Brandon of Oakbrook, page 50. The other two law lords concurred. Clearly, the theory of special relativity, that there are no instantaneous communications in nature, did not intrude upon those judicial pronouncements. This was my first irrefutable piece of evidence of the obvious fallibility of the House of Lords, and by extension, the Privy Council. So, light does move, but it moves fast, very fast. The detective story of how we discovered the speed of light is absolutely fascinating, but is yet another digression we cannot afford this evening. Suffice it to say, we now understand and accept that light travels at the speed of 300,000 kilometers per second. That is fast. In 1 second, light circles the Earth 7.5 times. In 1 second, light travels 80% of the way to the moon. For very complex reasons having to do with E equal mc squared, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. 300,000 kilometers per second is the fastest that information can travel. If anything could travel faster than light, the law of cause and effect would not hold, and we would not live in the universe that we do. The glass would break before it fell. This lecture would finish before it began. And Paula Llewellyn, KC, and Ian Wilkinson, KC, will be honored by Jambar before they enter legal practice. It is the nature of the universe in which we live that gravity, electromagnetism, and light move at the absolute speed limit of the universe. And they always move at that speed. Well, I'm sure Professor Grant would want me to add, they always move at that speed in a vacuum. Adding the spatial dimension. So, back to the speed of light. 300,000 kilometers in 1 second. That is fast. But space is vast. So vast, so huge, that it takes light traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second a full 8 minutes to reach us from the sun, which is 93 million miles away. Beyond our own sun, the nearest star to our solar system is Proxima Centauri. Light from that star takes not 8 minutes, not 8 weeks, not 8 months, but over 4 years to reach us. 4.25 years to be precise. And there are billions of stars further away in our Milky Way galaxy, and beyond our Milky Way galaxy, there are trillions of other galaxies. For one thing, this means that when we look at the sky at night, we are looking at the past. Sometimes 8 minutes into the past, sometimes 4.25 years into the past, sometimes billions of years into the past. For another thing, and this is more important to our lecture this evening, the laws of physics have built a prison around other solar systems within the trillions of galaxies, a prison of distance, energy, and time. These prison bars are so absolute that no scientific or technological innovation has ever been invented or can ever be invented that can allow us to reach other cosmic civilizations, assuming there are any to reach. And no other sentient beings from any other solar system can break through to us. Just like nothing can go faster than light, extrasolar system travel is impossible. No aliens are coming to destroy us or to save us. What solutions do we have? So, what solutions are there to prevent the use of nuclear weapons that could likely cause catastrophe beyond our imagination, as the principal said, and past our bearing? Three possibilities suggest themselves, three solutions, the first two of which I am not at all qualified to speak about. But that will not stop me sharing a few thoughts. I may not be an expert, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express recently. First, the theological solution. At least one prominent Jamaican has already proposed a theological solution to the threat of nuclear war. When Bob Marley wrote Redemption Song in the late 1970s, the Cold War of the nuclear arms race between the US and the then Soviet Union was at its height, and the fear of total nuclear destruction was a major global anxiety. Yet, in 4 immortal lines, he simultaneously challenged us and reassured us. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, because none of them can stop the time. Marley was of the view that man-made destruction cannot halt the steady, unstoppable march of history, divine justice, and the divine plan for humans' survival and redemption. Of course, eschatology is the mainstream among the main religions: Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam. They all offer theological solutions to the end of the world problem. But these are very deep theological waters. I don't want to wade too far. I know that Reverend Stevens is here tonight. So in the words of St. Matthew, after me comes one who is more powerful than I. Second solution, technological solution. Elon Musk and others are working on a plan for humans to visit and perhaps eventually inhabit Mars, one of the 7 other planets revolving our sun in our solar system. There are at least 3 difficulties with the idea that we can look to Mars for the answer. First, the trip would be extraordinarily expensive. It is a flight that none of us in this room or online could afford to take, even if we agreed to travel economy class. Second, Richard Feynman, an American theoretical physicist who worked with Oppenheimer at Los Alamos, does not think we can ever reach Mars. And if by some miracle we did, we could never return. He thinks that there are very serious technological problems to colonizing Mars. Thirdly, we could travel to Mars, perhaps, but we would travel with the knowledge and technology to build nuclear bombs there. How long before we begin to consider whether Earth should conduct a first strike on Mars? Before Mars conducts a first strike on Earth. As one of my favorite philosophers has said, wherever we go, there we are. Third solution, the legal solution. As citizens of organized societies, our first instinct is to turn to law and legal institutions for protection from threats to our persons and property. I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you, but nuclear weapons are in a separate category, possibly beyond the limits of law. Let us get the obvious out of the way, and let us do so candidly. No domestic legislature or domestic court can regulate the conduct of foreign nuclear powers, nor can they prescribe the threat posed by nuclear weapons. With the greatest respect to Jamaica's honorable and most honorable parliamentarians, there is no law that Gordon House can enact that could actually regulate the nuclear threat. With the greatest of respect to the Honorable Mr. Justice Brian Sykes, or Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Jamaica, and to the Honorable Madam Justice Marva MacDonald Bishop, or President of the Court of Appeal of Jamaica, no Supreme Court or appellate court in downtown Kingston can issue effective injunctions prescribing the use of nuclear weapons. And President, if it is of any comfort to you, neither can the President of the CCJ. What about international law? The law that regulates the behavior of states on the international plane. A list of the sources of international law is provided in Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. But essentially, the sources are 1, treaties, 2, customary international law, and 3, general principles of law to be ascertained, for example, by the International Court of Justice. Let's look first at treaties, sometimes called conventions. Treaties are widely regarded as the most important source of international law. They can cover a wide range of issues: diplomatic protection, trade, financial partnerships, military alliances, cooperation in transnational crime. The rules governing treaties are contained in a 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. What is often not stated is that as general legal instruments to regulate international conduct, treaties or conventions suffer from some very serious, even fatal, design flaws. For one thing, state acceptance of the treaty or convention is voluntary. No state can be forced to accept a treaty. See Articles 49 through 51 of the Vienna Convention. For another thing, the treaty is not binding on states that do not accept it. Article 34 of the Vienna Convention. This, by the way, is the principal reason put forward by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to deny that the International Criminal Court has any jurisdiction over the United States or other non-parties to the ICC. The final design flaw of the treaty relates to enforcement. There are no statements on settlements. There are statements on settlements of disputes in Articles 65 through 66 of the Vienna Convention. But the truth is that there is no effective international court or law enforcement agency to enforce treaty obligations. These design flaws are magnified in the context of tonight's topic. Let us consider a few of the treaties often mentioned in the field of nuclear weapons. First, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Adopted in 1968, it entered into force in 1970. The 3 main pillars of the treaty are: 1, non-proliferation. Countries with nuclear weapons agree not to give these weapons or technology to others. Countries without nuclear weapons promise not to build or buy them. 2, disarmament. All member states agreed to work in good faith towards ending the nuclear arms race and achieving total disarmament. 3, peaceful use. Nations agreed to share nuclear technology only for peaceful purposes, like medical assistance and electrical power, overseen by inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Key facts. There are 191 state parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The 5 states that manufactured and exploded a nuclear weapon or a nuclear device before January 1st, 1967 are parties: US, Russia, UK, France, and China. They also happen to be the permanent members on the United Nations Security Council. Design flaw 1. There are persistent reports that some among the 5 nuclear states have shared or are sharing weapons technology with other non-nuclear states. But neither the Jamaica Constabulary Force nor any other domestic police force has powers to investigate, and no courts can enforce any breach of the treaty. Design flaw 2. Several nuclear weapons states have not joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. India, Pakistan, and Israel have not joined. North Korea joined in 1985, but withdrew in 2003. These states, therefore, have no non-proliferation, disarmament, or peaceful use obligations under the treaty. The second treaty to mention is the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, adopted in September 1996. It is a global agreement that bans all military or civilian nuclear test explosions anywhere on the earth. There's a test ban organization monitoring system. All 14 sovereign CARICOM member states have signed and ratified and are therefore full members of that convention. Fatal design flaw 1. France and the UK are full parties to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, but to become law, the treaty requires the ratification from 9 other specific nuclear technology holder states: China, Egypt, India, Iran, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, and the United States. Fatal design flaw 2. These 9 states have not joined the agreement, as is their right under the Vienna Convention and the law of treaties. Accordingly, unfortunately, the treaty has not entered into force and is therefore not international law. The third convention, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This treaty was adopted in 2017 and entered into force in 2021. The treaty imposes a complete ban on nuclear weapons under international law, making it illegal to develop, possess, or use nuclear weapons. In short, it aims for the total elimination of all nuclear weapons. Design flaw 1. There are only 75 states which are members of this treaty, including only 7 in the Caribbean community: Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Dominica, Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. It appears that the other 7 members of CARICOM, or the half of the community, wish to retain the option to develop, possess, and use nuclear weapons. These ambitious states are: 1, Bahamas; 2, Barbados; 3, Grenada; 4, Haiti; 5, Jamaica; 6, St. Vincent and the Grenadines; and 7, Suriname. Though, to be fair, some of these states, such as Jamaica, as we heard from the minister earlier, are taking active steps to support the objectives of the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. The second design flaw here is that there are no nuclear armed nations party to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The 5 official nuclear powers members of the United Nations Security Council, US, Russia, China, France, UK, have all boycotted the treaty. The 4 de facto nuclear armed states, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, also remain outside the agreement. Allied nations under the nuclear umbrellas, such as NATO members and Japan, have similarly refused to join. As long as the status quo continues, it is not unfair, but perhaps unfortunate, to say that the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons has itself been nuked. The second source of law for the international community is customary international law. I believe we can quickly dispense with the use of customary international law to prescribe or regulate the use of nuclear weapons. In theory, customary law binds all states. However, this only happens if two elements combine: practice of states and the belief that the practice is required by law, opinio juris. These elements are examined by the International Court of Justice in a couple of cases I'll mention shortly. Suffice it to say, for present purposes, that in the formation of customary international law, the jurisprudence of international law places great emphasis on the practice of states that are directly affected by the customary rule. North Sea Continental Shelf Cases, 1969. If the customary rule concerns coastline fishing, for example, the state practice of landlocked nations without a fishing fleet will not be very critical to the formation of that custom. If the customary rule concerns the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, or comprehensive nuclear test bans, or prohibition on possession or use of nuclear weapons, then the nuclear powers must be participants in the customary process for it to become law. This could be by legislation enacted in their national parliaments, statements by state representatives in the public fora, action in destroying nuclear weapons. There has been no evidence that the 9 nuclear powers are engaging in any such legal practice. Customary international law may not be past the age of childbearing, but things are decidedly not looking promising. The third source of international law, general principles of law, ascertained, for example, by the International Court of Justice. For a full decade, 1986 to 1996, an international anti-nuclear citizen campaign under what was called the World Court Project lobbied governments and international organizations to ask the International Court of Justice, ICJ, for a clear ruling on nuclear weapons. Prompted by this activist pressure, the World Health Organization adopted in 1993 Resolution WA 46.40, asking the court if the use of nuclear weapons would be a breach of international law, given their devastating health and environmental effects. And a year later, in 1994, the United Nations General Assembly itself, piggybacking on the WHO action, passed Resolution 49/75, directing that the following question be asked of the ICJ. Quote, is the threat or use of nuclear weapons in any circumstance permitted under international law? Clear question. Respectfully to my colleague international jurists, not so clear an answer. In its advisory opinion handed down on 8 July 1996 to the question, is the threat or use of nuclear weapons in any circumstance permitted under international law, the court said a number of things. One, quote, with respect to the provisions on use of force in the Charter, those provisions apply to the use of any force, regardless of the type of weapons used. Which prompts the question, does this suggest that the World Court regards nuclear weapons as just any other kind of weapon? Two, quote, the principle of proportionality might not in itself exclude the use of nuclear weapons in self-defense in all circumstances, which provokes the observation that our World Court appears willing to sanction the use of nuclear weapons in self-defense. We should note that there is a very slippery slope between self-defense and anticipatory self-defense, one of the theories used by the United States military to justify its current military action against Iran. Three, quote, neither customary international law nor treaty law contain any specific prescription authorizing the threat or use of nuclear weapons or express prohibition of the threat of their use. In short, international law does not say yea or nay to using nuclear weapons. Even Parliament this morning appeared more decisive. At least I heard the Speaker of the Parliament said, the years have it. Quote, while members of the international community were profoundly divided on the matter of whether non-recourse to nuclear weapons over the past 50 years constituted the expression of an opinio juris, the court did not consider itself able to find that there was such an opinio juris. Interpretation: the mere fact that nuclear weapons had not been used in the 50 years since 1945 did not mean that there was a legally mandated practice not to use nuclear weapons. 5, and finally, quote, in view of the present state of international law, the court could not reach a definitive conclusion as to the legality or illegality of the use of nuclear weapons by a state in an extreme circumstance of self-defense, where the very survival of that state was at risk. Interpretation: in answer to your question of whether the threat or use of nuclear weapons in any circumstance is permitted under international law, we do not know. We cannot say. As an aside, at least we were spared, we do not recall. That non-decision must have been extremely disappointing to those who championed the World Court project. The case was decided in 1996 before Judge Patrick Robinson of Jamaica sat on the court. But in 1996, there was another equally erudite Caribbean judge on the ICJ. Judge Shahabuddin of Guyana dissented from the advisory opinion because he believed the court shirked its duty to provide a definitive legal answer to the question posed and wrongly left open the legality of using nuclear weapons. The judge maintained that the use of nuclear weapons must be regarded as entirely unlawful because survival of the human species could not be legally reconciled with their use. But Judge Shahabuddin was just one of 3 ICJ judges of this view. The other 12 judges did not know, would not say, or perhaps could not recall. Judicial pronouncements subsequent to the delivery of the 1996 ICJ advisory opinion have not materially changed the legal position. In the case of Marshall Islands against United Kingdom, 2016, the Republic of Marshall Islands filed applications against 9 states: United Kingdom, China, North Korea, France, India, Israel, Pakistan, Russia, and the United States, accusing them of not fulfilling their obligations with respect to the cessation of the nuclear arms race and to nuclear disarmament. The Marshall Islands alleged more specifically that the United Kingdom had violated and continued to violate Article 6 of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, to which they were both parties. According to that article, each party undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. Additionally, it was argued the UK had violated its international obligations under customary international law by failing to pursue in good faith and to bring to conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its respects. Although India and Pakistan were not parties to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, the Marshall Islands contended that certain of these treaty obligations, such as that in Article 6, apply to all states as a matter of customary international law. The ICJ did not determine whether the United Kingdom had breached its obligations relating to nuclear disarmament. Instead, the court upheld the UK's preliminary objection that no legal dispute existed between the parties at the time the applications were filed. On the evidence before it, the court concluded that the Marshall Islands had not sufficiently brought to the attention of the United Kingdom its allegation that the latter was failing to comply with its obligations concerning nuclear disarmament. I don't think any interpretation is needed for that. So, in summing up, 30 years after the ICJ advisory opinion in 1996, international law still has no clear answer to whether it's legal or illegal to use nuclear weapons. As shown, there are certain deep-seated design flaws in the infrastructure of international legal relations that make it difficult, if not impossible, to give a straight answer to that question. No first use. When at the end of the film, Oppenheimer said to Einstein that he believed that they had started a fire that would destroy the entire world, he was being logical. With the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki behind him, he was also engaged in a clinical assessment of human nature. The world's nuclear states have continued to modernize and enhance their nuclear arsenals. And increasingly, some of these nuclear states are publicly saying they will make first use of nuclear weapons in certain circumstances defined by themselves. Going forward, our first action must be to cauterize the wound, to erect fire breaks or fire control lines. I say with emphasis, we must get our nuclear states to forswear the first use of nuclear weapons. This will not be easy. The People's Republic of China is the only nuclear power which has expressly declared its commitment to not be the first to use nuclear weapons at any time and under any circumstances, and not to use or threaten or use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states or nuclear weapons-free zones. And I think we have some representatives of the Chinese embassy with us. I think they deserve an applause for that. India has adopted a similar stance, albeit reserving the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a chemical or biological attack. No other nuclear powers have been as clear. Often they prefer the policy of strategic ambiguity. The United States possesses an estimated 5,000 nuclear warheads, and their current policy does not restrict the president's ability to order a nuclear strike for any reason at any time. Russia has recently updated its nuclear doctrine to allow for first use in several scenarios defined by Russia. And it should be noted that the United States and Russia together possess nearly 90% of the global total of nuclear warheads. A no first use doctrine will not be easy to achieve. Because of the limits of law, we cannot rely on domestic law, treaties, customary international law, or even the pronouncements of our International Court of Justice. We need a new method of lawmaking to support the new freedom that we deserve. We could start with a no first use day recognized by the United Nations to catalyze the 8.3 billion people around the world. We already have a very powerful ally in the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and in the chairman of the Caribbean Community, Prime Minister Pierre of St. Lucia. Mobilization is the mandate. And who better to mobilize than our young people to whom the future belongs, and who do not wish to live under the mad threat of mutual assured destruction. I'm happy to see the youth ambassador, Mr. Rahim Augustine Joseph, here with us. I do not begrudge him his task. He may have to build at least 8,000 chapters around the world to reach 8 billion people. But it is the ultimate challenge in importance. It literally is a challenge to save the world. Conclusion. A handful of men with access to incredibly powerful nuclear weapons can at any time exterminate the 8 billion human beings on the face of the earth. With us would go every trace of civilization by our greatest agriculturalists, scientists, artists, poets, and statesmen. With us would also go the greatest teachings of morality by our most revered religious figures. In short, nuclear weapons can exterminate not only all of humanity, but also all of human history. And as far as we know, all sentient life. Recent armed conflicts in Europe and the Middle East have brought this threat to the fore. 8 billion people cannot allow themselves to be held mute and captive to the whim of a few, however benign, however malignant. This is intolerable. This cannot stand. The people of the world must awaken to the cataclysmic danger facing us in this moment. We must seek solutions, whether these be theological, technical, or legal. We must not go quietly into the dark night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for not only challenging us to think about the reach of international law, but the limitations in confronting one of humanity's greatest threats. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, he deserves another round of applause. And what I loved, I like the little drama. Lights on, lights off. We get it. We get it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move from the lecture to the conversation. Now, you don't want to hear me for the entire night, so I am going to urge you to use the microphones. We have one on this side, and we have one on the other side. It's being set up now. And what we will do now is to introduce our panel, and we will invite our panel to give a 3 to 5 minute presentation. Well, you want to call it a presentation? Just remarks. And I will get the ball rolling with the questions, but please, we heard a lot, and they have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to encourage you to engage and be part of the conversation. So, to our panelists, Professor Charles Grant, and Professor Grant is the Director General of the International Center for Environmental and Nuclear Sciences at the UWI-MONA. Professor? I'd also like to introduce you to Dr. Peter Glegg. He's a Senior Legal Officer and Chair of the Radiation Safety and Protection Committee at the University Hospital of the West Indies. And a fellow Taylorite. I'd like to also introduce you to Dr. Lisa Vassiani, and she is the head of the Department of Government at UWI-MONA. And we don't often hear from the clergy in conversations like these. And so it is my pleasure to introduce you to Reverend Norbert Stevens. He's the former General Secretary of the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Ladies and gentlemen. And finally, Mr. Raheem Augustine Joseph. He's the Commonwealth Caribbean Rhodes Scholar, LLC, and Youth Representative. And so we begin with Professor Charles Grant.
Good evening all. Good evening, Chief Justice. Really enjoyed your talk. I think you delved into areas that I had no idea you had so much expertise in, but I'm very impressed. So where to start? To me, the main point is the difference between regular, conventional explosives and nuclear materials and nuclear explosives. The main thing is the intense amount of energy that these things pack, as we had heard. But in addition to that, it is the ionizing radiation that it produces, which lives long past the actual explosion itself, which in itself is a horrific thing. I have been fortunate enough to actually visit Hiroshima and gone to the site, seen human imprints in walls where they were just immediately vaporized. Then looking at all the damage that was done around, it's just mind-blowing. I think everybody should see that, and then that in itself would help people stop thinking about even ever using these things again. So let's get back to the energy. So when that energy, once you have the nuclear chain reaction taking place, it creates a great deal of heat that comes along with the additional radiation. That heat causes extreme pressure waves that go out and cause the so-called nuclear wind, speeds of up to 1,000 kilometers per hour. We just went through a Hurricane Melissa. We're talking 180, 190. Can you imagine 5 times that hitting you and exploding outwards? In addition to the radiation and ionizing radiation generated by the bomb itself, you have the uplift of soil and debris into the nuclear cloud, which in itself generates additional radiation called fallout radiation. This, unlike the law, nuclear laws, doesn't respect boundaries. This has the ability to be transported thousands of kilometers away. So even though the event may be in another country, it does not mean that we will not be impacted. We most definitely will be. I can tell you on a day-to-day basis, I measure cesium-137. Those are from all the nuclear bomb testing that took place in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, as well as what took place in Hiroshima, as well as what took place in Chernobyl. That particular radionuclide is of particular interest because it has the ability to get into the food chain. So it goes into air, can get into water, and can get into you. The other one that is of immediate importance just after the nuclear detonation takes place is iodine-131, and that is because it's biological importance to us. Unfortunately, most of this iodine is collected in the thyroids, and if you don't take steps to prevent it, which you can, that ends up with the thyroid being destroyed and then lifelong health implications afterwards. So, with all that said and done, I'm a big believer of never using nuclear weapons. However, I am in the nuclear industry, in the business. There are also very good uses for nuclear technology. We heard some of those mentions in healthcare, in agriculture, environmental monitoring, understanding how our aquifers are recharged, and even useful using the fallout radionuclide cesium-137 to actually monitor soil erosion. So there are many, many very useful applications for the technology. And I would like to finish by just saying that the good and bad, even fertilizer in the wrong hands can be very dangerous, can be used as an explosive. So I crave that you keep that in mind, that when we talk about nuclear technology, we don't only think of the bad. It is very important that we do get that right, because as you said, this is an extinction, possibly an extinction event. So at all costs, that should be avoided. But we should not forget the positive uses of nuclear technology that can help and drive socio-economic development in the region. We are now 13 of the 14 CARICOM member states are actually IEA members. I think you mentioned that. We are working together on a lot of problems that the region suffers from, and we are in fact using nuclear technology to solve some of these. My 3 minutes will not allow me to go into all of these, but needless to say, we are in fact having 10 persons from the region actually being trained right now as we speak at ICENS to become nuclear regulators in their own countries. So we're taking positive steps. So let me go on a high note. That was applause. I'll accept it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Dr. Peter Glegg, Senior Legal Officer and Chair of the Radiation Safety and Protection Committee at the UHWI, is next.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As one who has been trained by the International Atomic Energy Agency in the area of nuclear law, and I actually teach nuclear law, I see my co-lecturer, Dr. Beholar, here. This is an issue that bothers me almost daily. I think of the world rising from the ashes of the Second World War, exhausted, devastated. And in the fledgling United Nations, then President Eisenhower thought of the power of this new energy source that they had unleashed on the world. And he said, this thing can take us back to being cavemen. He came up with the concept of atoms for peace, the peaceful use of this new energy. And this is where the International Atomic Energy Agency and all the conventions you heard about earlier on came from. The reality is that we live in a world where people flout international laws. That's the reality. It's good to have these laws, but if they're not followed, it makes no sense. And I think the solution to the problem is simple, and it's not new. In a speech to the League of Nations in 1936, June of 1936, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was complaining to the League of Nations about the fact that the Italians had dropped mustard bombs on his people. And he gave a speech to the League of Nations in 1936, which was actually made famous by Bob Marley in a song. And this is the solution. It says, until the philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior, then everywhere is war. Until the basic human right is guaranteed to all without regards to race, then everywhere is war. I think what we can do as a Caribbean people is make a decision now and follow through with it, like what Switzerland has done over the decades. We want a nuclear-free, a weapons-free Caribbean region, and we'll fight to defend it. Thank you very much.
I now invite Dr. Lisa Vassiani to bring you some remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Pursuth. Dr. Glegg has yielded 2 of his minutes to me. President Anderson, Principal Malcolm, thank you for this opportunity. Good evening, everyone. So we've heard from President Anderson that we shouldn't begin from the assumption that nuclear issues have only to do with powerful states. So it's not just a domain of great power politics. And this is the direction I'm going, that this is part of the reality for Caribbean states. So I'm diverting a bit, not to Mars, but diverting a bit. So this evening, I want to shift our attention ever so slightly away from the question of weapons. Although we're always directly affected by geopolitics, shifting power dynamics, transshipment routes. I remember as a student being worried about plutonium shipment through Caribbean waters, towards a question of technology. So CARICOM's engagement in this area has been deliberate and has been guided by a regional strategic framework. Prof. Charles here spoke a bit about some of the non-nuclear war areas for nuclear power, which could serve the Caribbean's development. Some of these include agriculture, food security, health, the environment, energy planning, radiation safety, and radiation technologies. So consider our context in the Caribbean. Non-communicable diseases account for more than 3/4 of the deaths in the region, with cancer among the leading causes. So nuclear medicine, radiotherapy, radiodiagnostics are now a good part of how our region can confront some of these problems with the good part of nuclear power that we've been discussing. Nuclear science also supports food safety, pest control, and other areas in the agricultural sector. As a region that's permanently worried about hurricanes, Melissa has not even been a year ago, we have to consider drought. We got NWC water restrictions just this week, invasive species. Some of the techniques that Prof speaks about will allow scientists to trace water, manage pollution and environmental change, and some of the issues that plague Caribbean countries. So we'll be better able to protect our coastal ecosystems and prepare for climate-related risk. So another area, to cut me back to my 3 minutes, there's a broader question, since we're here speaking about freedom, a few days after emancipation and 2 days before Independence Day. One question we should contemplate is that small states in the Caribbean have always had to renegotiate and recalibrate what does sovereignty mean for us in our foreign policy and in some of our national strategic imperatives. This has meant preserving the capacity to make meaningful choices in a system shaped more by more powerful actors. So nuclear policy, whether in the form of great power rivalry, transshipment of nuclear waste through the Caribbean Sea, or a range of security issues, all profoundly shape our lives. Luckily, Caribbean states have always been part of multilateralism, coalition building, and despite our small size, we have found ways to survive in the system. However, the effectiveness of our diplomacy and advocacy ultimately rests on democracy at home, and there are some figures that we should be concerned about in this regard. Over the last year, at least 7 Caribbean countries held elections. And if we look at the voter turnout in those elections, some of them have dipped to even 32%. In our case, we were concerned in a pandemic year that only 36% of us came out to vote. Just in 2025, only 4 out of every 10 Jamaicans felt it's worth their while to go to the poll. Why does voter apathy matter? Why is this important? Well, nuclear technology is not just an issue that can afford to remain in the lecture halls in the United Nations. This is something that our students or young people should know about. So when we speak of nuclear weapons, nuclear safety, disaster preparedness, environmental protection, and all of these issues, being a zone of peace, as the Caribbean has declared itself a number of times, does not exempt us from these conversations. If anything, it places greater responsibility on us. So Caribbean states must therefore remain active participation in the development of international norms and institutions governing these very issues we discussed today. We must continue to use diplomacy, multilateral engagement, and international law to advocate for our interests and our values. But diplomacy alone is not enough. We must also invest in knowledge and in capacity. We need citizens, we need young professionals. I see many of you here today from social sciences, from the Faculty of Law and Norman Manley Law School. We must invest in our young people, so we need citizens and professionals who understand these issues. Yes, we need the scientists, and we need the technologists. For sure, we need the lawyers and the diplomats, but also we need public policy specialists, strategists, and most of all, we need informed citizens. So 4 out of 10 of us going to the polls is not enough. So in many respects, this is why we are all here. This is what institutions such as the Norman Manley Law School and the University of the West Indies do. We educate our students, not just for employment. I know many of you are concerned about what your paycheck looks like, but we are also here to build a country and to build a region with technical, scientific, legal, and geopolitical strength to manage some of these issues beyond the war side of nuclear power. So if our societies are to engage and exercise meaningful agency, we must cultivate the expertise to engage these questions and the civic culture to debate them. So freedom isn't just strengthened by government action in the way we would implore our governments to observe nuclear days or sign treaties and ratify them, but this freedom is also strengthened through equipping our students, equipping our young people with the skills to understand public issues and to participate in democratic life and to contribute to conversations like these for the rest of their future. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Reverend Norbert Stevens.
Thank you.
It's good.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here. I hope that's not God speaking. The Honorable Justice Anderson set me up about shoelaces. I don't know how many of us recognize that the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church on the 1st of August declared that the Russian arsenal of nuclear weapons is a gift of grace and mercy from God, which has protected Russia from destruction. So all I can do is to offer perspective in relation to the presentation we heard today that is kind of very, very challenging for us. There are no solutions, just a perspective. And the perspective is this: where the law arrives at its limits, then conscience ought to be considered. I think there are two observations that I want to share and then just to say a little bit about conscience. And the first is a reminder that increasingly decisions are made by the few in relation to freedom in terms of those who are the many. It is the unilateral decisions of smaller groups of people that have an impact on larger groups of people. And we in the Caribbean are very, very conscious of that. If parts of us to the north sneeze, we catch a cold. And it's not just economic, but it's political, it's environmental, it's humanitarian, and we're seeing evidences of that now. That requires us to ask some questions, some ethical questions about sovereignty, but also about solidarity. I heard a very clear speech this week, and I will not say where it came from, but I'm sure you're all aware of it, about friendship. The second observation is that in this post-modern era, we speak more about deterrence in relation to sovereign states than anything else. And the argument is that if you have nuclear arsenal, it is really total destruction if you're going to attempt to challenge persons or countries that have the weapons. What that inculcates is a context of fear, that you live with this understanding that that which will allow you to survive is people being afraid of you. It leads to authoritarian regimes where surveillance replaces trust, where you do not have the kind of social freedom that you should have, but you serve the state rather than the common good. And I'm always reminded of what God declared when he completed the creation. It is good. There is a sense in which if we're going to offer any kind of response, it has to be the concept of conscience. And conscience is not necessarily Christian. It is just how we understand ourselves as human beings in a world that is so complex and is changing so rapidly. Conscience reminds us that not everything that is strategically useful is morally acceptable. It calls us to measure security not simply by military strength, but by the protection of human dignity, the preservation of creation, and the pursuit of justice. For people of faith, conscience is not merely a personal option. It is a moral awareness rooted in our conviction that we're all made and created in the image of God, and that every power is subject to a higher authority. Therefore, conscience must drive the debate, must encourage the stakeholders and the principal players to continued conversations around how we operate as human beings in the world. And I want to close with a little quote. The true measure of our common humanity is not the destructive power we possess, but the moral courage to choose life-giving and life-sustaining paths over death-dealing ones. Where the law comes to a place where it has limits, conscience must speak. And when conscience speaks, it should always speak on the side of life, peace, justice, and our shared responsibility for the future of humanity. Thank you.
And finally, Raheem Augustine Joseph, Commonwealth Caribbean Rhodes Scholar and the youth representative.
Thank you very much. It's always difficult to go after the Reverend because he touches the soul while I might be trying to touch the mind. But the main premise, therefore, in my mind is the young people of the Caribbean and the wider world are not uninterested in wider geopolitical machinations or the ability of superpowers to move at lightning rapidity. However, what worries me is our inability at times to see the interconnectedness of nuclear fights on the wider Caribbean region. So whether it be the cost of fuel, whether it be less tax revenue for government, so therefore they can't invest in social spending to give young people deposits to pay houses, or it could be a multiplicity of other priorities that happen as a result of big powers fighting, the young people are not uninterested. And whether it is that we see across the world young people taking a much greater place at the front through active protest and making the argument that there has to be a world in which peace prevails over war and that we do not go to the sort of most basic method to be able to resolve our issues. But this entire conversation always rested on the sort of liberal IR assumption, which is that states would work together to be able to operate and deal with their issues. And therefore, we built institutions surrounding that, whether it be the United Nations Security Council, whether it be NATO, all of these. But built within that design was, and still is, many defects. So whether it is the veto power at the United Nations Security Council, whether it is the lack of representation for countries that have millions of people, but also have been always left out of the conversation because we do not believe that these countries have a voice at international fora, whether it is the sort of insatiable belief by certain countries that they exist to be able to exert raw power, all of these things are inbuilt defective parts of the system that young people across the world, as particularly in the global south, are saying needs to be part of a new international rules-based order that isn't only going to be punitive, but that creates a new version of leadership around the world that understands that peace must prevail over war in many instances. And therefore, in my mind, what remains, in minds of many young people, what remains crucial as part of the sort of missing link in that conversation is building the relevant international institutions sometimes where the law fails. And at times there is a behavioral shift that needs to happen internationally that allows young people to have much greater conversation or much greater part, of a wider global conversation that isn't happening right now. Not necessarily as tokens, but giving them the early expertise and training and being part of decision-making across countries around the world that allow them to be able to make effective change. And in my mind, I know probably that's 4 minutes and 30 seconds, getting closer to the end of the race, but part of my intervention here centers mainly on the recreation of that international rules-based order that prioritizes young people's voices at the center. Because, as the President mentioned, really if you don't center their voices or center people, there really will not be a world in which to save.
Thank you so much. Do we have any young person in here who would want to build on that argument? Anybody? Any takers? Well, Sir Casey.
That means you'll be part of the coalition of the willing.
Yes. Okay, so no takers yet, but let me just start the ball rolling. This one is for Professor Charles Grant as well as Dr. Peter Glegg. Now, when I hear nuclear, I just immediately think of weapons. And you have spoken about peaceful nuclear technology and how nuclear technology can save lives through medicine and through agriculture. But to both of you, how do we ensure that we embrace those benefits without increasing global risks?
Well, as you would have heard, we are party to the NPT. We're also party to nuclear safeguards, and we also have a regulatory body here now. So this ensures that the way that we use and secure these radioactive sources are all governed by best international practice standards. There was one thing that I forgot to also to mention, that we are also signatory to the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which preceded the NPT, which ensured that the Latin America and the Caribbean is a weapons-free zone. So we were the first populated region to do so. So we are also leading the charge in another way. And as I said, the training that we're doing now, we have been leading the Caribbean effectively for the last 10 to 15 years on this. And safety and security first is always our mantra.
All right, Dr. Glegg, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Nuclear energy is the way forward for human civilization in terms of the peaceful use, the medical use of nuclear energy. So currently, we, at the University Hospital, for instance, we have there's a technology where you can ingest or have injected into your body certain radioactive isotopes, and you can literally pinpoint to millimeter accuracy the location of a tumor. Not only can you pinpoint this tumor, but you can also use radiation to burn this tumor with accuracy in millimeters. Where the technology is going in Jamaica, we talk about a cyber knife, which will be happening soon in this country, where you can literally use radiation, pinpoint radiation, to actually perform and remove tumors from certain areas of the body that normal surgical procedures cannot access. This is the way of the future. One of the things I can tell you about Jamaica, the minister mentioned the Hazardous Substances Regulatory Authority. I've had don't want to say misfortune, or the opportunity to work with these local regulators, and they are some of the strictest, most stringent, most miserable people that I've ever encountered in my entire life, and they're doing their jobs. And these are the people who ensure that the use of nuclear technology in Jamaica, not only in medicine but in agriculture as well, is done under the rules and the auspices of the Atomic Energy Agency.
We have a question. We have a mic right here. Can someone help us with the mic? Whilst we wait on that question, Prof, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have? Because, like I said, when we think nuclear, we just think war and bombing.
Right. Hello?
Yes, we can
good,
hear
good.
you.
That radiation, especially gamma radiation, leaves traces behind, which it does not. It's like sunlight. The fact that people having their idea that it's just about bombs and explosions, the fact that we've had a reactor here for over 40 years that's been used safely, tells you that this technology can be used safely, has been used safely, and what many of you may not know, so I can feel free to talk about this now, in 2015, we actually removed weapons-grade material from our reactor core. This is a core conversion. We did it in collaboration with the United States government, Canada, and the IAEA, and our team actually did the removal. So there are people here that are competent, well-trained, well-versed in the technology, and that they can have some amount of confidence in us, that we are here and we have never had a breach. And when we did that removal, that made us a weapons-grade uranium-free zone. The reason why we didn't make much of it at the time was because of security concerns, that this movement had to be done in the dead of night, so to speak. And we had, I think, like a 2-month period where we were not allowed to talk while it was on its way back to the United States. But just to say to the public at large, you can have some confidence in us. We've been here and we've been operating safely.
Thank you so much, Prof. We have a question from the audience.
Good night, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Anderson, President, for your excellent presentation. We have been proceeding along on an assumption that we're always will be dealing with human beings. But the presence of AI now is something that we have to contemplate as well. It would have been science fiction, say, 10 years ago, and to think of AI doing something beyond our control, but recent events with Anthropic and it jumping out, not just Anthropic, but the other one, I think, ChatGPT's program, jumping out of its cage, so to speak. Not just one program, but another one. And the warning that everybody else who operates these need to check their own systems to see. And with us increasingly using AI to do all manner of things, the fear that I have is, let's say we allow them to exercise control, not even over nuclear weapons, but something like a nuclear plant. Chernobyl happened because of human error. It wasn't a deliberate attack or strike or anything like that, just a mistake that was made. And we saw the disaster there. So what if AI takes over and it decides that it wants to do what it wants to do? How do we protect ourselves from that? So it's not just a human situation we have to look at now, but we also have to look at the possibility, the real possibility now, that the scenario that happened in Terminator Judgment Day is a reality, because it has happened. AI got out of its cage, not once, but twice, and did what it wanted to do. So that is something we need to look at as well, as part of the mix for laws and treaties and all of that.
Thank you so much for that point. Anybody wants to go ahead? Doug?
I'm not sure. Okay, I think it's working now. I'll jump on your AI question and start at the point where Caribbean countries, as your presentation, President, mentioned, we're good at signing treaties. We sign everything, usually from the inception. We're not so good at following up with our own local legislation. And in the area of AI, which you just mentioned in quite a fear-mongering way, this is an area where Caribbean states will have to learn that even if we don't have some of the resources in the way that we think we should, we do have agency. We are part of UN bodies, we have our own regional organizations, and we need to implement our own frameworks to protect our own human rights, whether it's the rights of our children in education, whether it's the right of our entire range of human rights, the right to privacy, the right to vote. All of these things are affected by AI, and one way to allay your fears is for individual countries to have frameworks. Jamaica already has a national AI task force. That's a good start. But one important thing for us to manage some of the issues you speak about would be for us to implement our own frameworks and our own laws, and to have our own agency in the international and regional fora of which we are members.
Thank you so much, Doc. Prof, you had a perspective as well?
Yes, and it started before AI, but the result is the same. It was just for cybersecurity to prevent hacking and things like this. So all our central and highly vulnerable systems cannot go online. They're standalones. Well, there's no connection to internet at all. And I'm just saying that those are the steps that we have not just taken, that we have in place, but for different reasons. No, please, I'm trying to hear what you're saying.
It wasn't connected, it was in a cage, and you still found a way to get up.
Just
go ahead, Raheem.
Just to add to what you said, I'm going to do the typical academic thing and say I'm going to provide some considerations. All right? I'm not giving you any answers, but what you've mentioned is why, again, there needs to be much greater conversation, whether it be about developer liability, determining whether it is that the developers are liable for the creation of the software, cognizant that there may be defects, mistakes, ability to run out of cages, or whether it is that institutions that utilize the models are the ones that are responsible for downstream misuse. But even in a more concrete way, whether it be that governments, as much as we can trust or not trust, that's for you to sit down and determine. Just remember, it's just considerations. To be able to determine the veracity and safety of the AI models prior to being released out there. But again, whether it is that we take the EU regulation model, the world needs to have a much more serious conversation that regulates AI by virtue of knowing that even if at the bottom of the whatever type of BT that you use, 5.0, whichever version of it that you use, the may make mistakes just doesn't cut it anymore, right? And therefore, there needs to be a much greater conversation that does not attempt to remove it from our existence, because that's impossible, but reduce the types of risks that you're talking about that have already started to occur by virtue of the mistake. But I take Doc's point very well that we are not part of the creation of models. And if it is that a treaty comes tomorrow, believe you me, we'll be part of the first signatories as part of our international law recognition, and the way in which we believe that we are part of the global community. But it does not mean that it immediately changes behavior, and the Caribbean needs to be part of that greater conversation of how AI and nuclear interacts.
Yes, sir, you can take the mic. And whilst you take the mic, this one is for Dr. Vassiani. Where do you see the Caribbean's greatest diplomatic strength?
That's a good essay question. I'll be teaching Introduction to International Relations in September, so I'll try to remember that.
The students.
One of the areas we have been able to use our agency is, quite paradoxically, one area that we have identified as our weakness. So we consistently identify ourselves as small island developing states, and we rank ourselves on these vulnerability indices to say we need special and differentiated treatment. And although this is a weakness, we have been able to use this very weakness to negotiate preferential treatment, special treatment, and we've also been able to use our numbers. So, Raheem, when you spoke about this liberal international order, that liberal international order was built with about 50 states who'd never envisioned over 130 developing countries being part of that order. And so one great strength we have is in our numbers and in our ability to use regional and international fora, whether it's through the Group of 77, which is now over 100 states, whether it's through AOSIS, through CARICOM, through the Organization of American States. Jamaicans, up to yesterday, we had the leader of Ghana come here. We've had several leaders come here. They don't come just for the coffee or the beaches. They come because we are a very strong coalition and they value our voice, and our voices actually translate to votes to assist countries to become non-permanent members of the UN Security Council, for instance. So we do have strength despite our size, sometimes because of our size, and absolutely because of our numbers and our agency in diplomatic fora.
Thank you, Doc. Question to the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam. First of all, let me congratulate Professor Anderson, Honorable Justice Anderson, President, on his very thought-provoking presentation. Obviously, very well researched. Also, congratulations to the panel for their thought-provoking concepts. Two of the statements struck me very forcibly. The one by Reverend Norbert Stevens, where he said that conscience is the limit for the protection of the 8.3 million of us in this world. And recently, we had a world leader who is of the view that somebody who has powers over nuclear weapons, his only limit was his own conscience. The majority, I would say, of the 8.3 billion of us, don't necessarily share his views. The second thing that struck me was Dr. Glegg's statement saying nuclear power is the nuclear potential is the way forward. Why that struck me is that in Jamaica, we don't have a stellar reputation for maintenance. With the proliferation of nuclear into the various aspects of life, which Dr. Glegg has mentioned and Prof has mentioned, with our less than stellar approach to maintenance, how are we going to be looking forward?
Thank you for your questions, panel. Well, Rev, you want to take it first?
The issue of the conscience is rooted in an understanding of the ethics of life, which declares that the values, the purpose, the principles you have are meant for the greater good. So yes, that leader's greater good is himself, but the conscience I'm speaking about is a conscience that looks at all of us and declare that we are inherently made in the image of God, and therefore we should seek for the best of the other. And the church has always taught that. That is not something new for the church. We've always been doing that. And so we need to enter the conversation so that people have a better perspective of how they see themselves and how they see others. We have become very isolationist as human beings. We are really self-centered and we have turned into ourselves. And the concept of neighborliness, the concept of community, the concept of consensus are all escaping us. And I think this is a really good opportunity for us to reinforce that the only way we're going to change anything is if we have a consensus position. We may not agree, but we have a consensus position that what is before us is real. I like a particular author by the name of Ken Follett. I don't know how many of you read his work, but he has written a book called Never. I encourage you to read it because it speaks about nuclear power and what happens when it gets out of control.
Thank you. Dr. Glegg?
Just to comment to say, I understand your concern, sir. But I will say to you that, one, we have been using nuclear energy in Jamaica quietly for decades. But two, we have some of the most brilliant scientists and well-trained persons in the world working in Jamaica and in the wider Caribbean. And they work quietly, and they work under three of the main auspices of nuclear law. And the first one is safety. The 3 S's, safety, security, and safeguards. And when you work with that type of energy, it's not like you're running a patty shop. It's serious business. And so I can say, and that's why you've probably never heard anything in the news before, is that we have been safely and securely using this technology in Jamaica for many years and maintaining them without any issues thus far. We're not perfect, and as was alluded to earlier on, Chernobyl occurred because of the lack of a safety culture. It's not that they weren't smart. They were smart guys, but they didn't have the safety culture. And this is something that we have ingrained here in Jamaica, in the persons who use this energy. They're well trained. A lot of them were trained by the IAEA, like myself. And we have first world training, and we have some of the best people. And while no one is perfect, I really don't anticipate any such problem here because of how seriously we approach this technology and how we use it.
Thank you so much, Doc. We have a question.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Vassiani. The past few months have been particularly challenging for Caribbean unity with assertive U.S. foreign policy. I want you to provide for us a perspective on how Caribbean nations can solidify regional solidarity whilst also pursuing their strategic interests. It appears that Caribbean governments are struggling with that balance, particularly here at home, in Trinidad, and in other parts of the region. And is there a need to rethink collective diplomacy, or how CARICOM pursues collective diplomacy?
Another good essay question. This one sounds like a dissertation, though. Okay, so I know the time is upon us soon. And my short answer to this would be that this era, which we now speak of with such great fear, is not the first time that Caribbean countries have faced geopolitical concerns. Perhaps the power in the international system is organized a little differently now. We were accustomed to the structure of the Cold War during the 60s to late 80s, early 90s, and we knew exactly what we were managing, and we knew exactly who the two poles of power were, the Soviet Union and the United States. The current system is much different. We're not sure if we're in a multipolar system. You know, some of our scholars will even say we're in a non-polar system because we're managing, where's our AI guy? We're dealing with cybersecurity, AI threats, types of power that we cannot manage. And so some of what we may describe as disunity within CARICOM or within the region really is individual countries. Rev just spoke about us being selfish. One of our main international relations concepts speaks about states standing up for their national interest. And so some of the behavior we're seeing that some of us may consider to have shown us moving away from principled foreign policy, which is what we like to speak about in the 70s, 80s, maybe even in the early 21st century. It's a different type of politics now. It's a very uncertain era. And so some of the behavior we see and are not, some of us not appreciating, perhaps if we think a bit more carefully, we will understand that countries are acting in what they consider to be their strategic interest, whether or not we agree with them.
Thank you so much. We have a mic. You can just go to the mic. So let's take a question from the young lady here, and then we have another question from the young lady over here and the gentleman. And I'm also going to check my phone to see if we have any questions online. You may go, miss.
All right. Thank you so much. If you see me looking at my phone, I have a few notes. All right. So I want to take it back to the theme. The question in the theme, no first use. And I kind of want your position from a policy perspective. 81 years after 1945, is no first use really the true deterrent that we think it is? If we look at the current standing, only 2 countries properly employ it, and 1 country is not unconditional. And I think that from India's perspective, their employment it gives them an advantage because it's a second strike, meaning they're not the person to strike first, and so they don't need the arsenal requirements for multiple strikes, just 1. right, from the U.S. perspective. So for India, I think it's more of a politically stabilizing factor, right? Now, for the U.S., of course, guided by Donald Trump and his own conscience, their position is, if we employ a no first use policy, we don't have a strong deterrent position. Our allies or adversaries may not find us to be a true deterrent. Our allies may be disappointed and we may look weak in the image of our allies. And then thirdly, it will go against non-proliferation, because then you'll have more persons saying, okay, US weak, let us try to get our own hands on our own nuclear supplies. So that's the position of the US, and obviously that's the position of Russia, who thinks it's a gift from God himself. So is no first use really a deterrent? Or is the deterrent having the nuclear weapons and not showing your hand to your adversaries, which is truly the position of the US? It's 81 years after 1945, and we're operating on diplomatic relations and conscience. Is it valid?
Who wants to take that one?
I would just say, even though you haven't asked me to, there's a thing called balance of power, that the countries suspect that each other are amassing, there's an arms race, and just by virtue of knowing the capabilities of each other, that's enough for there to be no first use, as you have mentioned. That's my short answer.
All right, thank you so much. That was your only question? Or
Yeah, that's my question.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that question. We have another one here.
Yes, good night, everyone. I just wanted to go back to Professor Grant's opening remarks. He mentioned two jargons. I'm not very au fait with the language you see. So if you could clarify what is meant by CD 47 and ID 131, I think.
Oh, sorry. Cesium 137.
Oh.
It's metal.
Okay.
And it's one of the fission fragments. When you actually split uranium-235, that is one of the elements that comes off as a radioactive nuclide.
Oh, okay. And to go back to my colleague's point about the deterrence, Dr. Vassiani mentioned legislation, but beyond legislation, do we have any educational tools to prepare our people for the challenges and opportunities of nuclear technologies? And if we do, what are they? And if we don't, how can we design them?
Thank you so much for that question.
I think I should jump on the question about educational tools. And I know that Professor Grant has a project underway where the reality is we need to move away from this misconception about nuclear energy. And the only solution to it is education. And I give you a good example. When MRI scans just came out, it was called nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, and nobody used it. But as soon as they removed the word nuclear from it and just called it magnetic resonance imaging, now everybody wants an MRI. If you have a pain in your toe, you want an MRI. So the issue is really public perception and education. And I know that Professor Grant is in the process of doing just that, and it's something we need to do. I want to say something that some people might consider controversial, but if I had my way, at some point in time, maybe in the next 10 years, we need nuclear energy in Jamaica, but that's another discussion.
Prof, you wanted to add anything to that? Okay. So we have another question here. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is for Mr. Augustine Joseph. You spoke about your hope for the recreation of a new order for, talks about nuclear weapons and such. So my question is, what's your level of hope for this new order and, I guess, feasibility to not recreate a system which has some of the same failures that you spoke about, like the UN, especially given in the context where leaving out the big powers and favoring a wide international discussion has, proved bad, for example, with the ICC recently.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think every time someone who is a bit more experienced in life tries to convince me of how terrible the world is, I ask them how did they feel at age 20? And any time, almost in a very flippant way, I believe in incorruptible idealism because I'm young enough to believe it. Now, I believe in it also because I'm very cognizant that when you look at, for example, the young people in Kenya some years ago who essentially rewrote the IMF rules of structural adjustment that would have affected their livelihoods and their education and their housing, etc. When you look at the young people in Palestine, when it is that you look at the young people in Barbados, for example, a few years ago, who said that it's time to take down Nelson, we're also in the right period for me to reference the people in Zimbabwe who were chanting down Babylon to Bob Marley, whether it be the formerly enslaved. I give you all of these examples only to say that despite the pessimism of the intellect, there must always be an optimism of the will, and I'm hopeful because I watch young people all across the world stand up and mobilize and say, we deserve better. The ability, however, or the problem, I guess maybe we say worry, that I have is that we are at times not sufficiently aware of the historical circumstances that will not cause us to recreate the same problems that the previous order has created. And therefore, this new conception of freedom that the president is talking about has to always be centered on a new pedagogy that allows young people to understand that some of the problems that we can recreate in the UN system or we can recreate in a board of war, etc., can only happen if it is that we are not fully aware of what the current trappings and failure of this current system is. And therefore, there needs to be a wider coalition of young people across the world that engages in this sort of historical instruction that allows us to rethink. And I see some countries doing it exceptionally well when they bring young people in a room and say, dream of a future that you can just dream of without thinking of any of the trappings of the current one. So I'm extremely hopeful, extremely optimistic because of the work of ordinary young people all across the world. I hope that makes you hopeful too.
Thank you so much for that response. And our final question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, panelists. You've been very riveting. It's more of a comment because initially, Janella, you had invited perhaps any youth perspectives in response to what Mr. Augustine had said. And as a very active youth advocate, I think this issue cannot go any further without centering young people because fundamentally, we are the ones who will be inheriting the world going forward. And in terms of centering young people, there has to be an active and deliberate attempt in educating young people about these issues so that they feel a part of, and so that we don't always have conversations like these being bolstered by the experts only, but people who can feel a part of it. The only way for us to do away with apathy is to make people care about the situation, make people feel as if they can connect to it. And I suppose my question is that, are there any deliberate attempts? I had initially sat down and I thought about, are there existing advisory committees that would welcome young people being on it to perhaps contribute to policy perspectives? Are there research committees that the university perhaps has? Are there collaborations with the Faculty of Law for those students who are studying nuclear law? When I was at faculty, that wasn't offered then. But if these are opportunities that exist, where are the avenues now for the active and bright and ready young people to be a part of it so that this is not another conversation where there's another Rahim, there's not a conversation where it's just the experts, but it's a Tamoy, it's an Alicia, it's Sean, all the young people who I know in this room, and that when we have these energies now, we can go and preach to the unconverted so that we can have, I suppose, a flurry of active young people who know how to engage these issues at a particular level, can demand from our politicians and stakeholders, these are some of the things that we want to hear when you're in Parliament and the considerations that ought to be made. And so that way, we're not on the sidelines, but there is active engagement. So this is perhaps more a commentary. And then two questions were interspersed, and I welcome perhaps anyone to comment on these.
Anyone wants to take it? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just speak about some of the opportunities for youth. And, I just have to open LinkedIn and I see 23-year-olds with so much more experience and participating on this Youth Council, UN Youth Advisory Committee, but you asked specifically about within the university system. In my department alone, we have a Model United Nations Club that sends students away. The students yourselves, as you know, determine what the agenda items for that. So I believe if you really think about it, you'll admit that there are a number of avenues. We have clubs for future policy leaders. We also have governance societies. Perhaps it is you're overwhelmed by the number of choices there, but there are actually several.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. Professor Charles Grant, Dr. Peter Glegg, Reverend Norbert Stevens, Dr. Lisa Vassiani, and Mr. Raheem Augustine Joseph. And I think that our keynote speaker, the Honorable Mr. Justice Winston Anderson, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, also is deserving of a round of applause for that excellent presentation. And I've been getting the wrap-up signal for a while. So let me just keep the wrap-up very brief, just to say that on behalf of the Caribbean Court of Justice and the Norman Manley Law School, thank you, everyone, for participating in this inaugural lecture. Good night.
Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen,